Hello, welcome to episode 17 of Wealth Talk. My name's Christian Rodwell, the Membership Director for WealthBuilders, and I'm joined by Mr. Kevin Whelan. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing well today, Chris, and it's the first time we've done a podcast without us being in the same room together today.
It is. We're doing it remotely today, but I'm sure the experience will be just as enjoyable as usual. And we're moving on to Pillar 2 today, which is pensions. Yeah. I know this is an area close to your heart, Kevin.
It's an area very close to my heart, but a bit like home capacity, Chris, when we saw the evidence of people turning their homes into something that they thought outside of the box and then discovered that there was hidden power in their bricks and mortar. And that's relatively easy to see, I think. But pensions is definitely the opaque one. It's the dark one. It's the grey one. It's the one that people hit snooze when they hear the word pension. They think, oh no, this is a box consigned to when I'm 65. Do not disturb, do not touch. This is just something that gets done, gets arranged for me, and there's nothing I can do, right?
Yeah.
That's what they think.
I know.
It's the most underutilized. It's more underutilized than the assets, which is Pillar 1, which is property, home capacity. The pension one is the biggest, most undiscovered asset that people can bring to life if they choose to. And there's a whole new language around it, Chris, which we'll of course need to share. Like everything in wealth building, you have to learn a little bit of new language, because it's that new language that helps you think outside the tradition of what you've been taught, which is put your money in the hands of somebody else, let them take care of it, and you pick up some money when you reach the ripe old age of 65 or whatever. I read an article just this weekend, Chris, which said the number of over 70s still in work is doubled in the last decade.
Really?
People are just having to support their lives in their late 60s and early 70s, and sometimes even beyond that. And this isn't to do with fun. This isn't, doing some charity work. This isn't giving back to society. This is, making sure they can make ends meet, because the combination of what they did in their wealth building just wasn't enough. And the biggest one that's going to cause people massive, massive pain is the pension one. And we should really dive into that one, Chris, and talk about the different shape of pensions, the different style, just so people get it. And we'll try and demystify it and just make it really, really simple. And I think we've got a few people who are going to give testimony, haven't they, to they'd forgotten something and then we nudged them and then they found money, and sometimes spectacular sums. Isn't that right?
Well, absolutely. And we'll go into those very shortly. But because there's such a big topic, really, pensions, we'll probably cover this over at least a couple of episodes, maybe even 3 over the next couple of weeks as well, because there's many different facets, aren't there, and different things that can be done with the pensions.
Yeah, well, there's so much to do. So, why don't we start just by kind of understanding a little bit more about what we actually mean by the word pension and how they work. And how they work now is a product of the past, is definitely not a product of the future. And then we can introduce the concept of SSAS, which some of our listeners will have heard before, enthusiastically being spoken about, probably right the way through this series, I think. We'll hear that word coming across time and time and time again. So we need to give them that language too, don't we, Chris?
We do. And there's some resources that we can share with this episode today as well, like some videos to go and watch and just start understanding a bit more about the SSAS pension, and that's SSAS, so Small Self-Administered Scheme. So before we actually start hearing from some of our guests today, Kevin, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about with regards to pension?
Yeah, I think there are 2 really fundamental types, Chris. And I think it's important that the listeners work out which of the 2 that they have. Or maybe they've got both. And I'm not going to talk about the state pension, because we know that's being kicked back further and further and further and further and further away. And frankly, wealth builders oughtn't to be shouldn't be too worried about the state pension, because if they're worried about that, they got the wrong plan. So they shouldn't be in the wealth builders program at all. But the pension's getting worse and worse and worse from the government. There's just not enough money. So talking about not being enough money, the big one that I suppose is now closed for the vast majority. It used to be the way that I suppose those people where pensions served them well, Chris, came from what we call the final salary pension, sometimes known as a defined benefit pension, sometimes shortened to DB. So we're going to have some language here. So final salary / defined benefit / DB. And all that means is way back when, Industrial Revolution type, when people used to work for the same company from age 25 to 65 or 20 to 60, and then they retired, the whole concept of retirement was really you were knackered. You needed to give up work because you were just exhausted. And what happened in the, I suppose, origination of pensions is the idea that the benevolent employer would set up a scheme that the individual employee wouldn't have to worry about. It would just be there, ready and waiting for them when they reached their retirement date. So they stepped off work, got the carriage clock maybe or some gift on the way, and then they got a pension for the rest of their life. And, that was a really good plan. And it served thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the UK. But those days are long gone. And we definitely touch on that, Chris, in the book, 7 Pillars of Wealth. There's been a massive shift away from those pensions. And I suppose you can understand the reason for it. So how they work was somebody would go to work. Let's take the example of somebody works 40 years in the same company. Doesn't happen these days, but let's imagine it did. So you go to work, and then you'd start off at, let's say, at 20, and you finish at 60, and you put in your shift. How the pension worked is for each year of service. So each year you stay as an employee, you get a fraction of that year's salary, kind of locked in, and the fraction in those days was known as a 60th, so 1/60, which means if you then worked 40 years, you got 40 60ths of your income at the time you left. So in simple terms, 2/3. So the maximum you could get is 2/3. Now, putting aside whether that's a wealth builder aspiration for financial independence, it probably isn't, because who wants to live on 2/3 of what they were on before? Not sure I would like to do that. But nonetheless, 2/3 was the replacement income, and for many people, they could live on that and live out a life that was worthwhile. However, in an era where interest rates are low and stock markets are volatile, it's been frankly impossible for the companies who set those schemes to run those so to the point where they could successfully have enough money to pay out those pensions in retirement. So they're now only the domain really of the public sector, which is the civil service, the teachers, the armed forces. And the reason why they're still available for them is because really there's no money going in. It's the taxpayer who's footing the bill. So the taxpayers of the future will be paying the teachers in the future. So there isn't a pot of money, so to speak. But for everybody else, if you work for a big company, like British Airways or Marks and Spencer's or Tesco or whoever it would be, then it's the company who had the job of managing money to provide the benefit. And one could argue that's a really quite valuable benefit. But as that increasingly now diminishes, and in fact, I don't think there are any really big schemes, big employers where the pensions are open anymore to that kind of benefit, it's meant that more people are getting to the point of understanding that no matter what happens, even if the company does an outstanding job of looking after the money and provides the financial pension at the end, because people are changing jobs and schemes are closing, they're not going to get anywhere near the 2/3. So that's a kind of a big realization that the vast majority of people just simply, won't be able to rely on those pensions in the future. As you'll see, most schemes are set up on a different basis, which is a different language, Chris, which is known as money purchase. What that means is, so instead of the employer paying you a pension when you reach a retirement date, now the employer puts money into a pot, and there's a legal obligation to do that these days, and you and your employer both put into a pot, and your pot is then invested. And traditionally, the plan is you invest in the stock market. And, we'll cover the stock market, I think, in more detail in Pillar 3, which is investment. But suffice to say, the vast majority of people in the UK have money in the stock market, where they hold their money, they pay scant attention to the funds, they kind of get a default fund maybe, and then they just leave that money to reach a point when they hit retirement date. Then that money is a pot equal to whatever it is. Say it's a few $100,000. Say for the sake of an argument, it's 200,000. When they reach that figure and they get to retirement date, that 200,000, they now need to turn that money into an income. So they need to convert that money into an income stream from that pot. And the traditional way of doing that was an annuity, which basically meant you give the lump sum back to the insurance company, and then they give you an income for the rest of your life, and maybe a pension for your spouse. And rarely was there any pension for children, and that's certainly the case with defined benefits. There's almost nothing ever paid to children as in a defined benefit, going backwards there now. There's usually a pension for the person who was the employee, and then a 50% pension for a spouse or a partner, and then invariably nothing for the kids once they're out of education. So there was never really a legacy plan. And remember, one of the wealth building principles is the importance of building a legacy. So all of these pensions I'm talking about, Chris, are fundamentally flawed in one way or another. Certainly defined benefit, flawed in terms of a legacy, and also increasingly companies are themselves going bust. Look at the numbers of schemes that have really closed in years. BHS, Carillion, numbers of, there are dozens and dozens of companies who just simply couldn't manage the money. And then the promise of money to come just wasn't there. And consequently, the retirement that people were expecting, even in the defined benefit schemes, has either waned or has diminished massively. And with the money purchase, you're having to buy an income based on not really understanding. If you don't want to buy an annuity, you don't want to give the money away, you want to then manage that. So you sort of invest in the stock market, then you draw income from the pot, which is known as drawdown. So you've got a pot worth 200,000. You hope you're going to make money, and you spend some of the growth. And the safe drawdown rate, both in the UK and US, is pretty much acknowledged at 4%. So if you've got 200,000, Chris, work it out. 200 grand at 4% gives you 8 grand. You need to know what the state pension is if you're going to get 8 grand.
Yeah.
So the dramatic fall in the certainty because of the uncertainty of the stock market and the uncertainty of how you're going to convert money has meant for the vast majority of people relying on some plan to just invest and hold money for the long term and hope for the best is really caused massive problems. And if you think back to 2008, Chris, when we had the credit crunch and the stock market crash where people lost 30%, 40% of their money, imagine you retiring in 2008.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you lose 40% of your money. You can't do anything about it at all. You've no control over the timing of that, but you need the money because you're no longer employed. You're heading for a whole world of hurt at a time when you could at least really deal with that. So I think the skill in wealth building is not to accept pensions as a buy and hope model, but rather it's to take responsibility for seeing it as an asset that you can own and control and be part of the value creation. And we'll talk about that when we talk about SSAS, in the way that you could treat your pension like a business and therefore invest in what you want to invest in to create more levels of certainty in a way that the current pension model, which frankly, in my view, Chris, is broken, is fundamentally flawed, and is perpetuated by an industry that knows the vast majority of people will just stick their money in the stock market, hold it for the long term, hope the ride is going to work out for them. But meanwhile, there's just huge fees that are being paid, for the lifetime of that relationship with an unsuspecting client. And this, for me, just doesn't work. It's outside of wealth building principles. And I want to encourage people to really understand that pension is something they can take control of. They can learn how to manage. It's not an easy thing. You don't learn how to do it in a minute, but you can learn how to do it over several weeks or months. So not too long. And you can start there. But the starting point, rather than get too heavy about this, is to first of all take stock of what you've got. And what we do know is many people, particularly in a world where they're changing jobs frequently, or companies they used to work for get taken over or they go bust or whatever can happen to those. People lose track of their money, Chris, and lots of evidence. And I wrote an article not long ago, I think, which revealed that there's something like, 10 billion. That's not 10 million, that's billion. That's billions. We're not talking about small sums of money. 10 billion pounds of money that people have just forgotten about. They're so out of love with their pensions. They just consign, I only worked there for a year. I only worked there for a few years. It's not going to make any difference. I'm not going to put in the effort to find out about that. And that's the biggest mistake you can make. So before learning how, learn what you have already and take a stock take of who you work for, where that money could be, and there are definitely ways and means of being able to track that money. And we'll hear from one person who said, Chris, really, it was nothing more than a phone call.
That's right. And on the government website, the Pension Tracing Service, which we'll link to in the show notes, it actually says that on average, people have 11 jobs throughout their working life. So it's very easy, for some of those early jobs that you may have thought, I wasn't really, earning a massive salary. There's probably hardly anything there. And you might just dismiss it very easily. But as we'll hear very shortly from our guests, you must check every single possible pension that you think might be out there, because you just never know when you might get a really nice surprise.
Absolutely right. And, I suppose we'll, as we say, if we take 2 or 3 episodes on this huge subject, because it's definitely the asset that the vast majority of the population, use to build their wealth upon. It's the one they know they're going to draw income from. But they're ill-equipped to know how the income conversion works. So I'm going to try and break the myth of the stock market is the only way to do that. When you can invest in business, you can invest in property, you can become a bank and take the same profit that banks do in the same way that banks do, with security, with good rates of interest. There's so many ways that people can take that control. And we've got lots of clients who will give evidence of how they've done that as well, to bring it to life rather than just hear the theory. It's to hear people who've taken the lessons on board and done dramatic things, including, dare I say it, Chris, and I'm not giving financial advice, and it's important to stress that this is a podcast for education and information and hopefully a little bit of entertainment along the way. It's definitely not meant to be a place of financial advice. We dispense on here principles that we believe are fundamental, like the principle of understanding what you've got, principle of understanding how it works, and the principle of understanding how you get leverage on it. So that's a long way of saying there are many clients in our community, Chris, who've wrestled long and hard with the final salary pension as well, and have taken the steps to seek and take control over that money and dramatically improve their lives and their value of the legacy way, way, way more than the pension they would have had they left it with their employer. But that's for them to tell. And as always, this is not advice. It's just simply me saying, hey, listen to what people are doing and think about what's right for you and make your own mind up.
Indeed. Well, let's listen to 3 members of our WealthBuilders community now sharing their stories around how they have traced some lost money in their pensions. And I think you're really going to enjoy listening to these. Okay, so I'm with Andrew Abaza. Welcome to Wealth Talk, Andrew.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Well, it's nice outside. The sky's blue and the sun is shining, so I'm happy.
Awesome stuff. Now, Andrew, you've managed to trace some lost money in your pension. So would you mind telling our listeners exactly how you went about that?
Yes, happy to do that. I'm with WealthBuilders with Kevin, and he got me into WealthBuilders. And I had already some money into the SSAS pension kitty, And at Kevin's request, he said, "Are you sure everything's in there? Did you have any other funds in it, any money?" I thought, no chance, I said. But I thought that prompted me to maybe actually go and have a look. So what I did, I had a happy Sunday afternoon going through some files we've got here, obviously with all the accounts and past accounts and all the rest of it. And we're going through the old pension files, and I found stuff which was already there. Then I found one from one pension fund, which I thought was in there. I did a check in the SAS kitty, that is. I did a check and found out it wasn't. And in that, I thought, wow, this looks good. And so I contacted the pension fund after that and found out there's £100,000 in there, the value, the transfer value. So wow. So I notified Kevin. He was very happy. I was very happy. And it went into the kitty after that.
Yeah, well, that is quite a nice surprise to find that amount of money, isn't it? For sure.
Very, very nice.
So
yes.
just so our listeners are very clear. So how, was there a particular website, or how did you actually kind of trace that and manage to actually locate that?
Well, it's really a bit simpler than that. I actually just went through the files in our home office, as it were, looking for any old pension documentation, literally just papers. Right. I went through it and found a few bits of paper there, which, from a fund which I thought was long dead or transferred, and looked into it. And
then just contacted the pension provider directly?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, to make sure it's still valid. Yeah. And it said, yep, still sitting there. Yep, absolutely.
Okay. And then what kind of timeframes has that taken to then be able to actually, get that money? And what have you now done with that money, Andrew?
Well, the process of getting it from the pension fund into my SAS was, what's the word for it? It took a lot of paperwork because they obviously don't like giving up the money. But with the help from WealthBuilders and so on, I was able to do the correct paperwork, get it all transferred over. So yeah, it was a bit of a process, which is quite correct, by the way. We're talking serious sums of money here, and I don't mind doing it. So that's what went through. And then as far as going into the SAS, it's now sitting in my SAS kitty, which is boosted very nicely. And I've already been making investments previously from the other money. So it's working very well.
Wow, that's brilliant, Andrew. So your advice to anyone listening who thinks that they might just have an old pension kicking around is definitely to go and dig through those drawers and make sure that there isn't any lost money out there.
Yeah, absolutely. What I do is go through those old paperwork, the other stuff we all hate doing, spend a happy Sunday afternoon, maybe have a drink beforehand to help you on your way, and just go through those old files, no matter how awful it sounds like, go through everything, and including your old employment records as well, just to make sure that you'd be amazed what is lurking there that may be valuable for you.
Well done on that, Andrew, and thank you very much for sharing that with our listeners today.
Okay, that's fine. That's great. Enjoyed it.
So I'm with Chris Cook. Welcome to Wealth Talk, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. How you doing?
Very good, thank you. Now, Chris, you've also managed to trace some lost money in your pension. So would you mind telling our listeners how you went about that process?
Sure, no problem at all. Worked for HBOS going back, 99. I joined the company until 2007. Took voluntary redundancy and understood that it was actually was told that it was a frozen pension. Realised it wasn't a lot of money at the time. I even recall making a phone call through to them and they told me it was worth, about £10,000 at the time, and that it was frozen. So basically left it. Met Kevin, started talking to him, and he bet me 20 quid that it was going to be worth even maybe up to 60,000. Sure enough, got a surprise when I found out it was worth 255,000. So huge opportunity for people out there, got no doubt.
My word. So we're talking £250,000 there.
Yeah, for basically, not expecting it at all. So obviously a great surprise.
That certainly is. Now, so what exactly was the process? Did you just go back to, obviously you knew who the pension was with, you just called them up and you just asked them what the value was?
Yeah, people believe it's a difficult process. Even since this, I've spoken to my sister about it because she worked at Midland Bank going back into the 70s and 80s and told the very same thing. So, already I told her how simple it is because it's a simple case of national insurance number. And you give them a call and they trace it and you ask them for the value of the equity and transfer value. And took 5 days. It's a frustrating wait, not knowing, but then when it comes through, it's a very nice surprise.
So now obviously you know that you have these funds. What are the plans to actually make use of them?
So it's very early days. Obviously, there's rules because, that's why it's called a pension. You can't just go and spend it and put it on red or black. I do have buy-to-let properties, and we're looking at buying other properties, but I do understand there's going to be limitations about what we can do there. So I have a limited company that I own. In fact, I've got 3, but I actually solely own one of them. So I'm going to create a SSAS. We pay corporation tax, and it's been going more than a couple of years. So I understand we're going to create another company. We're going to create a SSAS and then work out the plan from here.
Okay, great. And then myself and Kevin will be talking about exactly what a SSAS is for those listening right now who maybe have heard this term come up more than once on the Wealth Talk podcast. But well done again, Chris, on that. That's a very nice little surprise there. And thank you very much for sharing that with our listeners today.
No, lovely. Thank you, Chris.
So I'm with Veronica Franks. Welcome to Wealth Talk, Veronica.
Hi, Christian.
How you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Now, Veronica, you've managed to trace some lost money in your pension as well. Would you mind sharing with our listeners how you've gone about that?
Yeah, it was really straightforward, actually. We were looking at all of our pensions from past employments, and we'd created a list of those that we thought we had and collected old statements to have a look at that. And then I actually woke up one morning and realised that I might have forgotten one. Casting my mind back to my very first employment when I was a graduate. And, maybe it was a bit insignificant because I transferred actually within that company to another company, and I didn't feel like I was earning, a great amount of salary at that time. But I thought it's worth investigating. So I literally Googled the name of the company and their pensions department and made a phone call, because I thought rather than trying to dig out paperwork, it hadn't, become obvious that I had the paperwork. I rang one number, gave them my national insurance number, and they confirmed that I did indeed have a pension with a transfer value of £45,000. So that was a nice day to wake up to.
Yeah, wow. And so easy, just literally within a few minutes, pretty much you had the good news there.
Yeah, and I think, looking back, I might have sort of thought about it and thought, I don't know how I tracked that down, and obviously I didn't have that file with my other files for some reason. But, I think a lot of pension companies, if you've got your national insurance number and they've got your records, it seems that, they'll look it up in that way, and that's how you can get access to it.
Yes, that certainly shouldn't be a reason for anyone to kind of like put this off if they think that they may have a pension out there somewhere that they've forgotten about. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I guess the question is, now you've obviously found that extra money, Veronica, how is that going to change things for you in terms of your wealth building?
Well, it's fantastic because we're currently setting up, we have set up a SSAS pension, which is a small self-administered scheme. It's linked to our property business, and, we're looking to significantly grow that business over the next few years. And we are able to use our SSAS to help us with that, not only to invest in other people's property projects, which is a means by which we can learn and work with other people, but we are also looking to lend money to our property business to help grow that business and invest in more assets.
Perfect. Well, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, Veronica.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Okay, so quite unbelievable there. A total of £400,000, Kevin, just between those 3 members right there.
And we didn't handpick these. These are things which were just, really quite timely, particularly with the subject of Chris, because Chris was only sitting with me in London a week or so ago, maybe 10 days ago. And when he was leaving the meeting, I said to him, Chris, you won't forget now, we'll hold you to this. You must go and write to that company and find out about that pension. You will do that, won't you? Yes, I'll do it. I'll do it as soon as I get home. And, although it was only a little nudge from me, it was just me pressing the flesh a little. He did it, and he called me a few days later and said, Kevin, I'm shocked. You were right. I was wrong. Not that it matters who's right or wrong, but the thrill of hearing £250,000 worth of money, which was being consigned to the history of an old employer, and what he can now do with that, and what he's now considering doing with that. And I guess we'll hear back from Chris on another day and discover what he does. But isn't that spectacular? And, this is just, yes, it's a big one, and it doesn't happen very often. But, 10,000 here, 15,000 there is still a massive, massive uplift in terms of leverage where you thought there was nothing. Now there's significant sums. So, I was so excited for him. I was thrilled for at least for the rest of the days. Like, I had a big smile on my face just hearing that, Chris, who's now obviously decided to become a client of WealthBuilders. In fact, we exchanged a note on that this morning, which is really great news, and I'm thrilled for what he's going to get out of that discovery for himself.
Yeah, I think that the big message there is just the simplicity, really. Someone may be thinking, oh, this is a big task, or, I don't know where all the paperwork is, and just putting it off for those kind of reasons. But as you've heard there from, certainly Veronica there, simply just Google your company, where you used to work, put a phone call in, give them your national insurance number, and it can be as easy as that.
One of the things about national insurance number is, the national insurance number is a really easy thing to have to hand. And once you have that to hand, that it's almost like the key that unlocks all pensions, because the way all pensions are connected to you is through your national insurance number. And, here's me on my soapbox again, Chris. You remember I said to you at the beginning of the podcast, there's £10 billion worth of money that's been kind of forgotten and left behind, often in the hands of insurance companies. Now, they know the national insurance number, these people, don't they?
Yeah,
they do.
They must.
Yes. And, and that's a thought provocation here, because it wouldn't take anything more than a link, a willingness to connect the national insurance number held by these insurance companies with the person at, central HQ, i.e. the government, to connect the two up and say, hey, did you realize national insurance number 1234567? You have got money owned currently in a pension pot with XYZ insurer, and this is your money. It wouldn't be too difficult to do that, but nobody's going to do it. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas, do they? The insurance companies just know that if nobody claims it, they get to keep it. So please, 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 if you've got any money anywhere or you suspect it, give the insurance company a call. Give your old insurer a call. Go to the pension tracing agency, which is the government department in Newcastle. At least they'll help you discover if your old employer is being bought out by another company and things like that, because it's money that's rightfully yours. And, from a wealth building perspective, that's good leverage. If you think of these phone calls, a few phone calls or a few emails can reveal several £1,000s of money. That's a hell of an hourly rate, Chris.
Sure is. And you said, rightly so there, that these were just 3 examples that have just come up very recently, which obviously we were able to share there. But, we have many of these examples. And are there any things that you've seen in the past, other mistakes perhaps that people make, or reasons why they would put this off?
Yeah, they always say, go back to your point, Chris, especially if they know they've got a few pensions. So, yes, there's the mistake of forgetting, but there's the mistake of remembering. You remember you've got 5, 6, 7 pensions even, but you just can't be bothered to put a spreadsheet together, or you can't be bothered to organize them. Remember that if you move house, the insurers don't all know where you live. So you're just getting that together just sounds like a task too big. And I would say that, within the task that we set all of our Wealth Builder community, which is never let 30 days go by, never let a month go by without taking some action to help build your wealth, is just do one a month. If you've got 7, it takes you 7 months. It's still done within, half a year. Whereas if you don't do it, you'll never get around to it. And those people who never get around to it then feel guilty and consequently still never get around to it. So I'd say at least take that lesson, find out what you've got, make sure you get it, and then just get the statements together. And once you've got that, the next step should at least give you a sense of, well, okay, I've got 100,000, I've got 200,000, or whatever I've got. At least you know what you've got. And then the next step is, how you then look at how to get a better return on that. And that's where, we have this phrase we use, Chris, in pensions, that most pensions need a kiss of life. We call it a CPR. Mm-hmm. And the CPR that we recommend everybody does, now people won't do it on their own, which is why we nudge them and we can help support that, is a review of the charges, which is the C, the performance, which is the P, and the R, which is the risk. and many people simply don't know whether they're getting value for money. So they don't know what they're paying in fees. The average person in the UK, Chris, is paying 2% approximately in total fees. So, if we were giving the example of a 200,000 pensions, I think, is that the figure I picked at the beginning of the podcast? I think it was 200,000, then typically they're paying £4,000 a year in fees. That's a hell of a lot of money. We can definitely show you how you can manage your pension yourself. And that saves you £4,000. If that £4,000, okay, it might cost you something, but even if it costs you a few £100 and you save 3,500 or 3,000, it's still an awful lot of money, which is yours, compounded year in, year out, year in, year out. And you can learn how to you don't have to be an expert. It doesn't take more than a few hours a month. It's nothing more than that. And we'd like you just to be aware of what you've got, understand that your pension needs a review, a CPR. You can do it yourself. We'll teach you how, or we can do it with you and give you extra support and help you understand then what you do after that, which is then, after the kiss of life, you need to recuperate. You need to do something else to turn that pension into something that could work for you, whether it's a SSAS or not, whether it's just a lower cost pension, whether it's just a different way of managing your relationship with it so you're aware of what you've got, or even if it's understanding. It's a platform on which to build the rest of your wealth. So, we don't always have to change everything, particularly if it's a really good pension or you're really happy with it. It's just working out then how it fits into the jigsaw puzzle of all of the other 7 pillars working together. And that's what I would take from that, Chris.
Yeah, that's great. So we've covered a lot in this episode today, Kevin, but I think just before we sign out for today and we look forwards to next week's episode is this topic of SSAS, which we've heard a few times from our guests today as well. So what will we be talking about specifically next week? And I know we've got some more of our members who are going to share specifically how they've used a SSAS and exactly how that's helped them in their wealth building journey as well.
Yeah, well, I think what I've said before about the concept of SSAS, small self-administered scheme, look, it wouldn't win any marketing titles. I didn't invent it. It's government rules. But like in America, they've got a pension over there called the 401k. Wow. That doesn't tell you what it does on the tin, does it? So similarly, a SSAS doesn't tell you too much, except that it's the domain of entrepreneurs. And if we really get under the skin of wealth building as a process, wealth flows to value. Value is created best by being entrepreneurial about your thinking. So if you're an entrepreneur in your mind, in spirit, then in action, a SSAS is the perfect vehicle for an entrepreneur because it allows you to take control of the pension. You become the legal owner of the pension for the first time in your life. And then with some skill, which, some teachings, with some learnings, again, not difficult at all. Please don't think it's hard work. It is not. Yes, you take responsibility. But once you have that responsibility, you can control that vehicle, massively change the dynamics of your costs, your performance, and your risks in a way that suits you. And there's so much evidence that people do a much better job, lower fees, higher performance, even lower risks when they're much more in control. And to be in control, Chris, you have to be thinking like a business owner. And in reality, those people who will qualify, because it is a qualification for a SSAS, you have to be a business owner. So at some point, everybody who's a wealth builder needs to be a business owner. Don't worry if you're not. Don't worry if you're an employee. Don't worry if you're self-employed. At some point, you will need to work on the principle of becoming a business owner as you build your wealth. And then a SSAS can help you on that journey. I think we've got some initial videos, Chris, which just kind of introduce at a higher level the concept of SSAS. There's a TV interview. I did an interview on Sky TV, which talks about SSAS. And then from our training suite, we've got a very simple, so what is a SSAS, in a way that we normally deliver our training, which is delivered by our SSAS expert, at WealthBuilders, a guy called Paul Brooks, who's just brilliant at what he does and is a brilliant teacher. And he will. We've got a video from him, and he runs the entire training program for our SSAS trustees. So whatever they need to learn, we've got a training module for that to make sure that people are compliant, they're confident, they're competent. And when you combine those things, then just like being a business owner, you have to be compliant, you have to be confident, you have to be competent. And if you are those things, you'll turn your pension into a dramatically higher performing vehicle than the ones that we've been talking about, where people tend to leave their money parked as opposed to being driven.
And we have actually got those videos and a whole bunch more in our members area, and it's free to access that. Just head on over to wealthbuilders.co.uk/resources. And not only do you get access to the members area of all the videos, but you get the 7 Pillars of Wealth ebook and a bunch of other wealth building resources as well. So next week, Kevin, are you telling me this is the point at which pensions get a little bit sexy?
Well, I got to tell you this, Chris, right? Because we'll probably reveal more next time. But in recent months, I've been involved in meetings, where I do a Q&A session to help people really get the message. And we've been in a room with 100 to 120 people, and there's a buzz in the room. And guess what the subject is? It's pensions. Yeah. It's people learning that if they control that, they get a better return for themselves. They help their business. They get a better return for their spouse or loved one. And they absolutely leave a intergenerational, tax-free legacy that will go from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next, in a way that no pension ever does that, when it comes from the place of convention and from the industry helping themselves to fees and charges that they have no right to levy. So more of that in the next episode, Chris.
Yeah, if that isn't enough reason to tune in for next week's episode, I don't know what is. So thanks so much for your clear explanations around pensions today, and thank you to our guests for sharing. And I look forward to speaking to you again next week, Kevin.
See ya.